talking about the business of landing your first real job. We've talked about narrowing the field, about trying to get from I don't really know what I want to do down to certain fields that are interesting to you. Then in section 2 we talked about how to identify the companies that you actually want to have an interview with and how to get into those companies to get that interview. And now we're going to talk about controlling the interview. And so now it's D-Day. You've got that interview scheduled and it's time for you to get ready for that interview. And the very first thing I'll talk about is the preparation. You cannot over-prepare for an interview. And that starts with research. Research that company. Read online, read the newspapers, read anything you can in the industry journals about that company. Pull things out, pull out pieces of paper because you're going to use those later as props. So anything you can find about that company. And you just can't spend too much time on that. I want you also to think about recent news and make sure you're as current as you possibly can. If the company has just announced an acquisition or it's just announced that it's being acquired or they brought in a new CEO or a president, you should be very current on that because that's going to be part of your talking points as you get into the interviewing process. And in the course of this, what you're going to do is you're going to come up with 3 killer questions. These are the questions that you're going to use during the course of the interview to control the interview, because this is all about controlling the interview. You must be the tennis racket, not the tennis ball. That is to say, I want you controlling the interview rather than typical case for a young person interview. They're just getting bombarded by one question after another, where you're the tennis ball just getting whacked and whacked and whacked. I want you to be the tennis racket controlling that interview, and the way you do that is by having these key questions decided in advance, thought through in advance, that you can ask so that the other person's doing the talking and you can listen, because while you're listening you can actually think. When you're talking, it's very difficult to think. But think about these 3 killer questions, and killer questions have a couple of things in common. One, they must begin with the words how or why. And I want you to think of questions that begin with the words how or why, because when you ask a question that starts with how or why, the other person can't just say yes or no. The other person has to give you a rather long-winded answer. And when they're giving you a long-winded answer, you can listen and you can start to think up your next question. So you're the tennis racket, not the tennis ball. And you'd be amazed how much people love interviews where they do all the talking. Because they walk away and say, boy, that was a brilliant interview. I really liked that a lot. In fact, as the interviewer did all the talking. And so I need you to think of, during your research, 3 killer questions, beginning with the words how and why. And the second element of this is these killer questions are supposed to help you get a sense for what kind of person this organization is looking for. There's a lot of yous. You've got many different facets that you can empty into this sink. And so we're going to make sure that you're going to be talking about the part of you that's most important to this organization. And the only way to find that out is to ask how and why questions that elicit from the interviewer some clues about what kind of person they're looking for. So a great how or why question might be, when you're interviewing people, how do you decide that there's a good cultural fit for that person with your company? Why do people come to this company? What kind of people come to this company? Why do certain people succeed at this company? What do they have in common? How do the superstars at this company manifest themselves? How do people get ahead at this company? Those are the kind of how and why questions that cause the interviewer to start to give you a sense for what are the culture, what are the things they value, what are the principles that they find important in that company. So 3 killer questions based on your research that will help you get a sense for what's important to that company and what they're looking for, because at some point you've got to convince them that you meet the bill, that you are the kind of person that they're looking for. The next thing that you need to do is practice. This interviewing stuff doesn't come easy, and even though you're very smart, and you've thought hard about it, and you've tried very hard. Like anything else, it takes some practice. So to the extent you can get a parent or a friend to practice interviewing, to pretend they are the company, to pretend they're on the other side, that's very useful. And to videotape it, and to see what you look like in person, what you sound like in person. There's a lot to be learned just by watching yourself and watching your body language. We'll talk more about body language in a minute, but practicing interviews is very important. And I would go so far as to have interviews with companies that you don't care about, just for practice. Jobs that you don't care about, that are throwaway jobs. Because you don't want your first in-person interview to be with the company that you most want to work for. That's like your first time at bat in the ninth inning at the World Series. That may not go so well. Better that you have some practice in advance. So practice, practice, practice. In person with a friend, videotape it, and go so far as to talk to another company just to get the practice of interviewing with anybody. The business of interviewing is a cruel one. The interview is either made or broken in the first 3 minutes. It's a cruel world, but first impressions are very powerful. And I've been interviewing people for a long, long time, and that handshake and that walk from wherever I pick the person up to my office pretty much decides whether I'm looking forward to this interview or whether I can't wait for this interview to get over with. And it's just the reality. There was an amazing study done recently at the University of Edinburgh where 10 people were asked to say hello on an audio tape. So the audience could not see the person. All they heard them say was hello. 10 different people saying hello. And then the audience voted on the characteristics of those 10 people based just on that one word, hello. And they voted on whether they thought they were credible, hardworking, ethical. And the audience agreed almost 100% in their evaluations of those 10 people based just on the word hello. So the vast majority of the audience either thought hello number one was a hardworking, ethical person, or whether they were a slouch, or whether they were a friendly person or a not friendly person. So one word sealed the fate for those people. And the same thing is true. So that handshake, that eye contact, that first hello is so, so critical. And handshakes are really important. Some of us are blessed with dry hands. Some of us are not blessed with dry hands. If you're not blessed with dry hands, and ask someone, shake hands with them after you're a little nervous, you've got to get rid of that problem. One way to get rid of that problem is with rice, just putting rice inside your pocket. So before that moment of truth where you shake hands with a person, you put your hand in your pocket and the rice will dry your hand. There's nothing worse than a clammy handshake. And the only thing worse than a clammy handshake is a soft, clammy handshake. So you have to have just the right amount of firmness. And most of you, it's more firmness than you're accustomed to. And so practicing your handshake with parents or others, making sure it's dry, making sure it's firm, and that you can actually shake hands and make eye contact and smile all at the same time. Because this is the first date, and you're trying to make a friend. You're really trying to impress this person with the fact that you're likable, you're intelligent, you're interesting, you're in control, you're confident. And the person who comes in with the eyes down and no smile, with the limpy, wet handshake, that interview is over. We're just marking time right now, because I don't want to spend much more time with that person versus this with the smile and the look. The next part of that is that first conversation. And you've got to take the lead in that first conversation. It's usually something innocuous from the other side. Oh, the weather's nice outside, or did you find us all right, or did you find the parking lot? Something stupid like that. That's amateur night. You have to do something much more impressive than that. You have to keep your eyes open as you enter that environment, whether it's a building that you're going to, or an office that you're going to, or a school that you're going to. Keep your eyes open, looking for something that you can comment on. Was the receptionist particularly attractive, or lovely, or friendly? Is the building brand new? Did they just mow the grass? Are there awards on the wall? What is there going on in that environment? This is that person's house. You're walking into that person's house, and if you're a guest in somebody's house, you have something nice to say about their house. Gee, the lawn looks great, the door looks great, the dog looks great, the awards look great. Find something that shows that you're in control. You've had a firm, dry handshake, you've made eye contact, you've smiled, and now you're walking to wherever you're going to meet, and you're saying something positive about the environment because you're in control. You're an adult, you're a pro, and you're in a position to compliment them on where they operate from. And they're proud of where they operate from, wherever it is. And you've got to make sure that you appreciate that. And by the way, if there is a receptionist, if there's someone out there greeting people at the door, that's where your charm school comes out. You've got to be as charming as humanly possible to that person and treat them as if they're the interviewer. And then at the end, when you're meeting the interviewer, say something nice about the receptionist. It will get back to her or him, and that's all good news. So you've made huge impressions all the way around. And you can't make enough friends at the beginning of this process. We're now in conversation, and I'll be a little bit indelicate because I'm here to help, not to make you feel better. There are a few things that people do that ruin conversations, in my opinion, and the opinion of most adults who are in the business of interviewing people. The word "like" is a terrific word. It has a lot of uses in the English language. It can be used to compare things. It can be used for analogies. But it doesn't belong in every sentence. And if you are a person who abuses the word "like," you should try to use less likes. And ask a friend, ask a parent, do I say like often, like way too often, like is like a comma or a period or a semicolon in every one of my sentences? It's a distraction. And your job in this interviewing process is not to distract. Your job is to be in control, to let that person talk, to get a sense from that person what they're looking for so that you can come back and explain to them why you are the right person. And uses of words like or we have some of us are ummers. It's a bad thing. It's a space filler. It doesn't help the conversation. It's distracting. The final pet peeve I'll share with you is the sentence that ends in the question mark, where every sentence has a question at the end, even though it's not a question. I know that that's very common in today's speech for the 20-somethings, and I'm sure that someday everyone will end every sentence with a question mark, but it ain't today. And chances are the person who's interviewing you does not end every sentence with a question mark and doesn't want to hear it because it drives people nuts who don't do it for a living. So if you can lose the question marks, that's a good thing too. Pet peeves, call me old-fashioned, but if I didn't tell you what I really thought, then there'd be no point in sharing this stuff with you. I want to spend just a minute on dress. People ask, what should they wear? If you're going to a high-tech environment sometimes, or a technology company environment, sometimes the dress is pretty casual. Sometimes it's shorts and t-shirts. My view is that you should dress at least 2 notches higher than the people around you for that interview. When in doubt, always wear a suit, always wear a dress. You're not there to dazzle people. It shouldn't be too sexy. It shouldn't be too loud. For men, it should be a white shirt or a blue shirt with a straightforward tie, properly tied with a knot at the top, not halfway down the top. If you can't tie a tie, that's cool. Find someone who can tie it for you. But a suit, when in doubt, I'd always wear a suit. Make sure the shoes are shined. And for women, I think darker is better, simpler is better. You're not there to distract. You're not there to dazzle them with your wardrobe. You're there to talk. You're there to listen. So I would share those thoughts with you on simplicity, but more dressy probably than the person you're talking to, or at least as dressy as the person you're talking to. When you get into the environment for the interview, I always like to encourage people to avoid sitting on the opposite end of a table or a desk if they possibly can. Putting a piece of wood or metal between you and your interviewer is not conducive to a friendly conversation. If this were a first date, you'd never meet that way. And think of this as a first date. You're trying to impress the person, you're trying to get them to like you, because it all starts with that. So to the extent possible, I like to get people to try to sit kitty corner, to try to sit, if the person sits down here, to slide the chair around so that you're sitting sort of kitty corner to that person. And there's less block and more air between us than there is with a conventional desk situation. Sometimes you can't avoid it if the person plops himself down at a desk and puts you in front of them, which is quite rude. That's the way it is. But if there's any chance to go kitty corner and just be a little more intimate, that's a good thing to do. So as we get into this conversation, there'll be a few opening questions, usually from the interviewer, how are things and so forth. And you can't leap right into your killer questions. Your killer question is going to be a retort to one of the questions that they've asked you. So they're going to ask you something like, give me a sense of your greatest challenge. What are your, strengths and weaknesses? They've got your resume in front of them, and they're asking you about different steps along the resume. Whenever you could see an opening for one of those killer questions, one of those questions that starts to get at what they're looking for, that's when you insert it. It's not going to be exactly the way you had it written out in the first place or had it phrased, but you've got to be ready to insert it so that you can start to turn the control of that conversation from the interviewer to you. You start to become the tennis racket, not the tennis ball. It can't be abrupt, it has to be subtle, that's why it takes practice. But give the interviewer some time to get their ball rolling a little bit. But be ready when they start getting into slightly more complicated questions for you to turn and get your killer questions in that get them back into a talking mode rather than an asking mode. So what we're trying to accomplish during this process is to take the risk out of you. You're a business. You're a business with a one-product company. The product is you. It's a limited time offer, hopefully, that we're going to sell this product and get you a job. But the key is for the buyer, the interviewer, the organization you're speaking to feel as though there's a very high success rate associated with you, because they don't want to hire you and fire you. That's a very expensive proposition. It's embarrassing. It's time-consuming. It's no good. So you've got to take the risk out of that decision for them, which is why you've asked them those how and why questions that gets you a sense of what they're looking for. But then you've got to come back and make sure that they know that you've got what they're looking for. If they're looking for people who are really good team players, and they're looking for people who really can collaborate. I was reading an article the other day about from the head of hiring at Google, which is one of the great places in the world to work. And they said, we want leaders working at Google. But by leaders, we mean people who know when to lead and to know when to let other people lead, which is a dynamic of a very successful meeting. When you feel like you've got the right ideas, to share them, but when you feel like someone else has got the right idea, to sit back and let them tease out their good ideas, and you be the synthesizer of the good ideas. And that's what Google said they wanted for their leaders. It's not just people barking out orders to other people, it's people who can lead others to become leaders themselves. So you've got to be ready with some examples of when you've done that, when you've been good at that. So you've got to think about yourself pretty hard, about all the features of your personality, of all your skill sets, and be able, once you've learned something about the values that this company considers important, the components of people they consider important, that you've got some living examples, some vivid examples of how you've shown that you've got those capabilities. The name of the game is take the risk out of the hire. It's not what's in it for you, it's what's in it for them. And they're the ones that are making the decision, and you've got to be good for them. And you've got to love what they're asking you to do, but ultimately they decide whether you're good for them or not. If you've really figured out what strengths they're focused on, what skills they're focused on, and you've got some tangible examples, don't be afraid to repeat it a couple of times. When you listen to a TV ad frequently, the benefits are repeated 2 or 3 times of that cleaning solvent or that hair product or whatever. You've got to, if you think you really understand what they're looking for and you've got it, repeat it 3 times. So at the end of that interview, there's no question about the fact that that person knows that you're good at what they're after. We've completed the interview. The meeting is over. There's another firm handshake with eye contact, with a smile. You ask for their business card. You always get their business card, and almost everyone has one. And that creates the follow-up. I don't like to have email follow-ups. I think a follow-up, thanking someone for the interview, reminding them of something that was said during the interview is best done in writing with a proper letter, with a postage stamp and the whole works. It sounds like something from the 18th century, but they're so rare these days that people actually open them up and read them, as opposed to one of 100 emails that somebody got along the way. So I like a formal follow-up. It shows that you care. It shows you were thinking. And if there's another item that you've seen in the press about the company, even more. A wonderful addition to that thank you note. Oh, by the way, on the way home, I was reading this thing in the Wall Street Journal. I was reading this thing in the American Journal of Medicine. I was reading this thing in the Educational Journal about this. And I thought it was so apropos to what you said during our meeting. Nobody likes flattery more than an interviewer. No one wants, and there's nothing like having your words repeated to give someone a sense of flattery. And it shows that you really care about the person. It shows you really care about the organization, because you're still keeping track of what's going on with that company. And even in the interim period, when you don't hear anything, because you're not going to hear anything for probably days, maybe weeks, another good excuse to lift something out of a local newspaper or a national Google search, whatever, and send another note. Could be by email this time, but just saying, saw this the other day. Again, so true to what you said on Tuesday. It shows that you're still in contact, you're maintaining the contact, and it just makes you a different candidate than all the other people that came in through Monster.com. So I hope that's helpful. At some point you're going to get an offer, and that's when the fun begins, because now the tables have turned. Now you are the decision maker, not the other person. And the offer is a wonderful thing. The one thing I recommend when that offer comes is always ask for one little thing. If they say you get 21 days vacation, ask for 22. If they say you have to tell them in 7 days, ask for 9 days. Just one little thing that makes it's sort of like the hook in the fish. It just says, gee, this person is for real. They've already decided that they're going to hire you. If you ask for one more little thing, I'm not talking about another $20,000 in salary, but one little thing, they've decided they're going to hire you. They're not going to blow you out of the water because you asked for one little thing. But it just says that you're a person in demand. You're a person that's in control. You're a person that is, not just a commodity. You're a value, and asking for that one little feature it just shows that you're cool. You've got something going for you. I hope you do. I hope you're successful, and I hope you land that first real job, because it's going to be the first real job for the rest of your life. So make it a good one.